Welcome to Discover Midwives, the podcast where we explore the art, science, and impact of midwifery. I'm Jessica Brumley, and each episode we'll uncover the stories, the history, and the expertise of midwives. This is your space to learn, connect, and celebrate the power of midwifery. Let's discover midwives together. All right. Thank everyone for joining us today. I'm so excited to have with us Trinisha Williams. Trinisha is a native of Brooklyn, New York, like I am. We share that in common. And she holds a master's in public health and midwifery. She's practiced as a certified midwife for over 20 years, has attended over 1,000 births in hospital, home, and birth center settings. She founded Midwife in the City and the Haven Midwifery Collective, and she currently serves as board president of the American Association of Birth Centers, advancing equitable access to midwifery care. Trinisha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me here.
I'm really excited to talk to you today about birth centers. I mean, as the president of the American Association of Birth Centers, you represent the organization, but also just that setting for birth. But I like to start off with a story, and I think that our origin story to midwifery is sometimes some of the most interesting stories that there are. So I'm wondering what drew you to midwifery and birth center care.
Yeah, so what drew me to midwifery was my sister's pregnancy. She became pregnant pretty early in her life. And by being at her side throughout her labor, her birth, her childbirth, her Lamaze classes, and even a few prenatal visits, it made me really curious about birth. And then when she delivered my nephew, 9 pounds, 10 ounces intact, and for a small person as she was, 5'6", I was like, what is going on? How does this baby come out? How did this happen? So I had to get more into the buzz of it. At the same time, I was working in public health at a public hospital. Most people used to know it as Bellevue, but it's changed its name. And I heard about midwifery there, and I said, I need to figure this out if I could be part of this. So that's what led me into birth. What led me into birth centers was working at hospitals and just trying to think about how we can offer care for those low risk families with limited interventions. And I heard a lot about home birth, and I thought that would be my ideal setting. And it is a setting that I have sort of engaged and love as well. But I like the idea of a birth center because then you don't have to bring, as the midwife, all the materials and things you need for birth. The families show up to you to be able to get the type of care that they want. And you can do it a little bit bigger of a scale, meaning that when you do one on one care at home, sometimes it's harder to see or have two clients that are in labor in two different homes because you got to go back and forth. But the birth center, you could potentially care for more than one laboring family at the same time. So that's what brought me into birth center care. And just understanding that we can have a space where midwives can thrive and offer care and be able to deal with those low risk families.
I often think of birth centers as a place where the midwifery model of care can be implemented in, like, I don't know, I'll say like the greatest fidelity, like we can really execute what we want in that setting. This comes from someone who hasn't practiced in the home or a birth center before, but you've practiced in all of the settings, and I wonder how you might describe the difference of home birth center and hospital birth to a client, or to the birthing person, what that experience, how that's different.
Yeah. I mean, I lean more into the family of what their own experience has been. And for some families, coming to the hospital and not feeling heard might have felt more traumatizing for them. That's how they may characterize it. What I tell families is, what do you see as what you like? We can bring all those family members into the birth center. We do have certain regulations and ways that we monitor how things are going. But if goodness forbid there was a turn in your care, that there was a concern about your health or your baby's health, we may decide to move you to higher level care. And what I find for families that want to deliver at home, it is definitely more intimate. It's the space they've grounded themselves in. It's the space that they have curated whatever things they have there. It's the space that makes them feel whole and calm and feel most like their authentic self. And while the birth center emulates that space, it is truly not their real space because they're coming into a space that simulates what they can have at home. But some families, the home may not feel as inviting. Maybe there's a lot of family there. Maybe it's really close quarters, or maybe they're in transition between two homes. Or so for some people, they said they don't want to deal with any potential mess that could be there because that has happened, at home births, whether it's a little blood on the sheet or something like that. I'm like, I'd just rather not. I'd rather, if it's going to happen, let it happen in your facility and not in my home. Yeah.
I think about what homes are like in New York City or in cities like New York City, where people are living in really close proximity to each other, right? And birth can be really real, and you might have some hangups about what your neighbors are hearing when you're
And
birthing.
you're correct on that because even I've heard from families that they're concerned about their noise, particularly when they're pushing, if they're more vocal. And what I often remind folks is that when we are pushing to deliver our baby, we are taking that breath in and we're trying to use our energy to push our baby out. And screaming might not be the best way. But amongst the home birth midwives, we sometimes see signs on people's door that they're having a baby, and we'll take a picture like who's which midwife is in this in this home that may be making a little bit more noise. But most times families are okay. Most times the landlord doesn't know, but it all just kind of depends. But at the birth center, that's not a real concern. We bring all those things you need, your comfortable pillows, your scents that you want, your affirmation cards, and we help you display that how you need to in that space so that this way you can feel like you're in a home-like environment that we allow you to claim that space for, hours so you can deliver your baby and sort of recover from that process. Yeah.
I mean, I think it sounds amazing, home and birth center birth. Um, but I wonder if you can describe like who's really a good candidate for a birth. My guess is who's a good candidate for a home birth is also a good candidate for a birth center birth. Um, but
Yeah.
you tell us who's really a good candidate for a birth center birth.
Well, these are families that we would consider low risk, that you don't have concerns about abnormal glucose testing. And that if you did, it would only be based upon diet and not necessarily the need for medication. Someone who is normal tensive, meaning that you don't have elevated blood pressures, because that could always put you at risk for other things in which we need more medications or interventions to help monitor you. Usually, folks with one baby that is presenting then the head first position. Usually, it's either first time moms or even repeat moms, because maybe they've had their babies and other facilities and want to try something different for every birth. And usually it's someone who has have negative labs on a lot of different things, whether that's HIV or other things like that, because we don't necessarily have the medications in place at a birth center to give you medications for certain communicable diseases. So these are things that we need you to consider. Sometimes people ask me, well, I have used assisted reproduction, and is that of concern? If your baby is, in a good position inside of the uterus and your placenta is performing, perfectly, we're okay. But if there's some concerns that we've said is too low or there's not a good perfusion or we're concerned about baby's growth, this may not be the ideal setting. We probably will need higher level care, maybe not in the intrapartum, but definitely in the postpartum. And we'd like you to be at that facility that you need to get that care from.
I'm curious. I know in Florida, if you've had a previous cesarean section, you're not a candidate for a birth center birth. Is that true across other states or across the US?
Yeah. It depends upon the states. Every birth center has sets their own policies around what they like to have happen. We encourage birth centers, particularly the American Association of Birth Centers, to work with our partner organization, which is the Commission for Accreditation for Birth Centers. The American Association of Birth Centers sets the standard on what should happen at birth centers, but the Commissions for Accreditation oversees those standards. And most states, most birth centers do not allow for vaginal birth after cesarean. There are a handful of states that will, so I don't want to say no, because we do have some that I could outline here that say that's okay, long as we have certain parameters put in place, like looking at the type of incision or the scar that the mother has and how long it's been since she's had a birth. And then that birth center will allow for that. But most times the standards say that that may not be the safest mechanism. And our standards usually don't allow for those birth center facilities that are accredited by them to have them because the research doesn't support it.
So since we're talking about standards, and I know that most people in the US are birthing in hospitals. And part of what people think about when they think about a hospital is all of the safety measures that are in place in hospitals. Um, but you've started to talk a bit already about how is it that birth centers can be a safe place to birth, that emotional safety that you guys set up through that relationship, centered care, the guidelines on who is a best candidate and to be there. I wonder if you can share with our listeners what are some of the safety measures that are in place in birth centers?
And the biggest one is when they start opening their facility is for them to seek out some accreditation. There are some states that don't allow, or I don't want to say allow, but don't have a standard set from the commissions for accreditation of birth centers. Those states have chosen to monitor whatever they deem to be a standard by themselves, and those are standalone states. We're talking 50 states here in America. Everybody can do what they need to do that they feel like they want to do. But we would encourage all birth centers to be underneath our standards because we feel as though that would at first align the facility with policies that would be evidence based, that all the people working at that facility would be aware of it, and that they would have strict guidelines on how they're implementing them. And the way that we do it is that every 3 to 4 years, we would come and review those standards and talk about what's going on. And if there were a poor outcome or a sentinel event, sort of something that may not be as ideal, we would come in and review that case and figure out how we can best address whatever the concern was to eliminate that risk for more families that may want to come to that facility.
So looking for an accredited birth center would be one way that a consumer can, confirm some of the compliance with the standards of practice, and
Yes. And
ensure safety.
if it's not the Commission for Accreditation of Birth Centers, then what does your state have for that standard? And that's an easy, search online to figure that out, so that this way you are sure that that facility has those standards set in place. While those standards are there, each state has their own rules. You want to make sure that that facility is up to date with that they haven't sort of relinquished their ability to keep up with what is the latest research and showing proof of even certification for CPR or NRP, which is another CPR for babies, so that this way everybody is aware of how to best support that baby and that birthing person should any crises arise. The other thing I would encourage families to consider is talking to them about their particular risks when they come to that facility, talking with them about how their transfers go. If there was something bad that happened when I was pregnant, what would happen? What would happen if something happens while I'm in labor? What would happen? What about my postpartum? How would your facility do that? And most birth centers have what they call orientation so that new families can come and they talk about all of these things about how the facility runs, how things are, different things like that, to be able to make sure that every family gets exactly what they need. And we're making sure that we're keeping safety at the utmost.
I love that, right? I mean, when we think of hospitals, we think of tours of labor and delivery to get a sense of what that facility might look like or what one's experience might be. But I feel like when you're having community-based birth, it's really more of a ownership and partnership in our safety. So thinking of it more as like this is orientation. I am a full partner in this experience, and it's so important for me to be fully engaged in my safety as well. I think that can be really powerful. So you talked a bit about what if, right? What if something happens during my postpartum period? What if something happens to my baby? What does happen if someone needs a higher level of medical care during labor? What might that look like?
Yeah. So in labor, most facilities have decided who they would best transfer the client to, which hospital, and how far that is. And some places are more remote, such as, some islands of Hawaii or some places in Alaska, because we do have birth centers there. How is that? Will I be airlifted? Can I be driven to that facility? What is that facility's name? Who would be the providers that would be on staff for me at that facility? And how would I navigate getting there? The other thing is, before you even need to go to that facility, what would that facility, what would the birth center do to intervene? Is it something as simple as we need an IV, or is it something as gravely concerning as you're bleeding too much and you're not even in active labor? So what is that concern, and how is that transport going to look for you to whatever facility? And ask them, will somebody be able from the birth center come with me? Will I need to go with just my family? Do you call ahead? Do they already have my records? Some facilities, what they will do is send over the records of every single client when they come to term. That's 37 weeks of pregnancy or more. And others will send them only when needed. So it's not necessarily that every place does the same thing, but what is that facility doing? So you want to, as a consumer, ask them about it. And you want to know who is their collaborating physician. Is there a particular physician or hospital setting that in which if you needed, a maternal fetal medicine doctor or an obstetrician, who would be the ones that would be taking over that care?
That transition from birth center or home to the hospital can be really traumatic for some people, especially if they were thinking in their mind that this is how my birth was going to go, and so really thinking about what that support will look like in that transition is really important. That is one thing that I do quite often is be on the receiving end of people who have been having community-based birth. And something we work really hard is creating that welcoming space for people to want to come if they need to come. But I know that's not necessarily the case in a lot of hospitals, and so I think having those really real conversations is important.
Conversation for facilities to birth centers to have. So that what does that transfer look like? I know this is what your ideal was, what your birth plan was set up for, but now that we need to move to higher level care, what does that look like? Is it okay that you're aware that most times they want to place an IV, or is your compromise with that particular facility, depending on which one it is, to just have a HEPLOC? How do you now feel about intermittent monitoring, meaning that we use a Doppler and listen to your baby's heartbeat every 15 minutes or 30 minutes, and now it's going to be continuous? And how does that mentally feel for you? Does that feel as though it's reliving whatever trauma you had or whatever feelings you had associated with that? And to know that we're trying to do our best to monitor your baby and your body to make sure you can be successful with this birth, hopefully vaginal. If not, what will we need to do for any type of intervention for a surgical birth? And you have to be open to the change and the transition that's now occurring. And how do we now help you deal with that sort of transition mentally and physically, particularly in the postpartum and in the intrapartum while this is going on? And that could be a little bit, of trauma for some folks, because whatever you idealize, it didn't happen. I tell people sometimes, like your wedding day, sometimes your minister may not show up. So what do we do? Do we call a new one? Do we reschedule? Like, how do we transition into what is in front of us to move ourselves forward? And the same thing can happen with birth. Although we have an ideal, we need to have some fluidity to be able to recognize that we need mom and baby safe first. And how do we best get that safety to happen without you necessarily feeling not heard by this process?
So there's so much work to do in our country in that space. But I definitely feel the support of the community midwives and in caring for the birthing people when they transfer from that community space to the hospital space. And it's so powerful to have that relationship that has been established over time. throughout the whole pregnancy. And when you have someone who you really trust, it can make such a big difference.
One
Yeah.
thing you can do as a consumer when you're going to your orientation is ask the facility, what is their transfer, not only protocols, but with their transfer numbers. Most birth centers don't have high numbers. Some will range anywhere between 20 to 30%. Some may have as little as 10%. And that tells you about how that facility is being maintained, how those midwives are able to identify families that may not be the best in labor to be able to get to where they need to be at to deliver their baby. So you want to ask that. So this way you recognize what's going on with you. And if you're entering care, knowing that you have, I don't know, heart condition, whatever the thing is, that you need to be aware that this may not truly go the way you need it to go. Some birth centers just offer prenatal care and they don't do deliveries at their facility. So that may be something that you may want to consider. We have a lot of partners out there that just offer prenatal care, and a handful of the clients will deliver at the facility because they recognize that some people, one, may not want a birth center birth, but also two, some people just want true midwifery care. And sometimes coming to get prenatal care there, they feel heard and listened to, and they are empowered now to go into the hospital to get the birth that they want.
Well, since you brought up prenatal care, let's talk about prenatal care because there is research that shows that people who have prenatal care in a birth center have lower cesarean section rates, regardless of whether they birth in the birth center or in the hospital. So when I read that, I interpret that to mean that midwifery prenatal care is really a key component to improving outcomes. Can you describe how prenatal care in a birth center, might look and feel like for pregnant families?
Yeah. For some families, it is a sort of a gateway to education and bodily autonomy and information on how your body will be in labor and how you can best allow your body to deliver the baby the way that you want. And what we have found with some of our birth center partners is that having constant contact with different health providers, whether that's your lactation specialist and having one or two visits with them and understanding the lactation process helps you successfully breastfeed, whether it's having prenatal visits with the childbirth educators and having at least 2 to 4 classes to understand those stages of labor in which it is taught in a way in which your body can digest it or may even be culturally aligned with how your language is. So this way you can absorb that information. And particularly when it's led by midwives and in response to having not only a doula or childbirth educator present, but someone else that can be able to help relay that information to the families. They feel more empowered. The other thing is that midwives typically will make sure they offer the same testing, but they may review the labs in a different way or explain the information to the family a different way so that they can feel part of that solution and feel as though they can be empowered to maybe make whatever health changes they need to if there is something going on, whether it's something as simple as a urinary tract infection during pregnancy to make sure it doesn't allow for some early labor, or something aligned of how much hydration you really need to have. Instead of saying just drink water, what is it really doing for your body? What is it doing for your baby? We have found that the access to midwifery care really does move and change outcomes. And so, like you said, it is helpful for a lot of families. And even planning for that postpartum, understanding that you need your family at your side, understanding that your family can be the ones to remind you about sort of staying in the bed or around the bed for the first few weeks and not go running out to go do regular life stuff. And having thought about meals and food and how we can get enough protein and lean, good vegetables, and thinking about our diet in terms of supplements that we need to make sure that we're doing the best we can for our body and aligning ourselves with rest because we don't often align with rest and letting our body heal and recover while we get to know this new baby and get the family to know this new baby and not feel like we need to jump back into life.
Yeah, I couldn't help but smile because I was just having a conversation with someone this weekend, and I could tell it was going to be a negotiation about if she would go out and walk the dog after she got home after having the baby. And I was like, it's a lot. It's really a lot to have this newborn. It's all consuming. Whatever you can offload, whatever you can outsource, you need to be doing that. right? The idea of, spending a week or 2 weeks in your home near and around your bed and really taking it easy is so foreign to so many of the people that we're, caring for and the way that we live in our modern society. So, I just laugh because it's a constant, right? These are constant conversations that, we're having with folks. And I don't know for certain, but my guess is these visits you're having in a birth center are probably a little longer than the visits that you're having, in a traditional hospital-based practice.
You're correct. Most of the birth center visits, particularly for a new client, is usually an hour to hour and a half, depending on where that transfer is happening. And the repeat visits usually are 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And it gives you a good chance to really sit and talk about whatever your concerns are, whether it's, something as simple as my wrists don't feel as good, or something as, bigger, my back is hurting as this uterus is growing and the baby's aligning and all the things, and how do we get ourselves in better positions to be able to make sure our baby's in optimal position for birth, and how do we sort of do some stretching and walking and let our body sort of give in a little bit but not too much into these changes that are happening with our body. So a lot of families find that helpful. The other thing is that we align with you bringing people with you to the visit. We like that more family members and friends are there. Those are more people to remind you about some of the things that we mentioned during the visits, and maybe even hold you a little bit accountable for them to make sure that you're making the optimal decisions for yourself and the baby. And I know sometimes I get partners or other siblings, or whether they're older or younger, and they're like, oh yeah, remember the midwife said this, or remember the nurse said this, and they'll help realign the parent or the birthing person with those changes that are happening and remind them of what we have talked about in the visits and how we can sort of better get ourselves ready. Because sometimes, we want to have good intentions for ourselves, but as life gets busy, we may not necessarily lean as much into ourselves, but into the other things. So it's really helpful. And most of the birth centers, like I mentioned, do have lactation classes. They really want you to be well equipped for supplementation. But also, the newest thing is a lot of birth centers really have a strong input for labor support. So they will align with doulas that can not only help you in the prenatal, because they do prenatal visits, but also come with you for the birth and do a handful of postpartums, especially since a lot of insurances are covering it. So they'll also make sure that that happens. But the other thing is that most birth centers have at least two visits with the midwife within that 2-week window. And usually that's either at the facility or at your home, depending on how your life is. So some people, you still don't want people to go to their home. But they'll come and visit you and they'll check on you. They'll call you and they know you and they see you and they've seen your face and they know when you're saying you're okay, when they're looking, oh no, you're not okay. I've seen you before. You should not be looking like this. So to figure out whether or not that is, something going on mentally or physically, is that blood pressure? Is it not sleeping? Is it that, the baby's not nursing as well, or you're concerned about the hiccups? All the things that sometimes new families or new babies sort of present themselves to that you can speak to somebody about. And a lot of families find that to be pretty helpful.
Support is, how do I say this? It Having the right support can literally be like it changes our physiology, right? Like it is the ultimate in stress management. We know stress makes us sick in so many ways, right? It can lead to hypertension. If I'm really stressed out, I can get a headache, or I might catch a cold easier. And when we're well supported, it means our body can do what it's supposed to do in birthing too. And so you've described so many components of both prenatal care and labor that are really designed to help us to be able to do what we were designed to do, and that's birth, right? When people think about pain management and the options that they have available at the hospital, I think that there's a lot of fear. I'm going to need this because we only hear about birthing in hospital and what really has been kind of isolated and is often with strangers around us. But what you're describing is really a model that is much more comforting, and it's much more supportive. Is there anything else that you want to talk about as far as like what's available or how you would describe labor support in a birth center?
Yeah, so I will first go to the one thing most consumers want to know about. Is there any real medications or pain management in that way? The real medications that some birth centers will have, and you have to ask each facility, they could have something like gas and air, sort of like the nitrous oxide that you breathe in. And for some folks, that is just enough to get them through, to get them to 10 centimeters to deliver. Other birth centers will have IV medications, and those IV medications will help you to sort of feel better with the pain that you experience. No birth center has epidurals. There are facilities that may use the word birth center that really aren't birth centers that may have epidurals available, but they truly are not birth centers that are midwifery led. The other thing that we can do is movement. Move around in different positions, walking, standing, squatting. Midwives have all types of positions that get you into labor to be able to help you out. Water, hydrotherapy is our best thing, whether it's a shower or whether it's a pool or whether it's the tub. All of those are really helpful. And almost all families have found that to be helpful. The thing to keep in mind with the birth center is we're open to you even delivering your baby in the water if that is what you should choose to want to have happen. And some families are up to it. Other families like, no, I'm going to get out. I'm going to get on the bed and deliver your baby. It just all depends. The other thing is that we want you to have labor support, whether you just have the midwife there or some doulas that are there. Massaging, certain acupressure points we know of, certain aromatherapies, positive affirmations, reassuring you about the process. Most people have said it is very helpful.
Yeah, there is a lot that we can do to provide comfort beyond the medication options that are available. But I think it's important to highlight that my understanding is that most transfers that happen are not for emergencies, but for pain management or stalled labor, where maybe you just need a little bit of pitocin or you want an epidural. It's something I meant to bring up when we were talking about emergencies. Like true emergencies are pretty rare. Most times, it's transfers are for non-emergent issues.
Yes, you're definitely correct on that. And that's because the midwives are there trying to identify what's going on and seeing how they can best intervene to maybe limit your risk and your baby's risk to any, future complications. And if they do identify something, usually like Jessica mentioned, you're not dilating, or for some families, once you get in the active phase of labor, some people, even though we offer our best pain management things, some people it just may not feel like enough. And it doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does. And we want to respect your rights and your wishes and make sure we offer you what you need, which would be higher level care.
So we've described a lot of comfort measures, tools. Um, I think that midwives working in community birth settings become really adept at using, right? Like I think you're more likely to find a midwife who knows all the acupressure points in a community birth setting in a birth center than maybe even a hospital, because we have different tools available to us in a hospital. Any other comfort measures or tools that you think we haven't covered that one might find in a birth center?
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. We have devices like whether it's vibrating things and stuff like that, and it depends. Some families, what we'll even do is offer them combs or something to hold in their hand. Sometimes, some people that works, whether you call it a stress ball, whatever the thing is. For some folks, that does have help. Other times, midwives will also do counting mechanisms during the time of the contraction. Some folks that does help, and other people literally just letting them walk out of the room to a different area. It can shift that energy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah, yeah. Um, so what are some common misconceptions about birth center births?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people think that birth centers have no regulation, or that, there you can just call up the birth center when you're in active labor. I get that. I remember getting that one a lot. People would call when I don't know that the hospital didn't do what they wanted. It's like, we're going to transfer you to the birth center. I'm like, we don't even know who you are. Like, we got to first know who you are. Make sure your chart is good. Make sure everything is. We know what your care level is. We want to be respectful of what your wishes are, but we need to offer you what would be best. So you need to sort of know which birth center you want to go to, start with prenatal care and then continue that care into birth. It's not something that you transfer to whenever, I don't know, your labor starts, or I don't know, when you're 40 weeks pregnant or some other interesting part of your life. You really need to start the care. And that birth centers will start you with care as early as 6 or 8 weeks. We don't necessarily need you to be 20 weeks when you might realize this may not be the birth you want, but you can start as early as you want.
Yeah, that relationship is part of how we keep you safe at a birth center, right? Like, yeah, especially because we don't you don't have all the things that are available, in a hospital. Yeah,
We
no,
also want to
that's
make sure we get
critical.
the we Yeah, we also want to make sure we get, sorry to interrupt you, we want to make sure we get the right candidates for it. And just because this is something you're choosing now doesn't mean we've had a chance to review your chart. Maybe you've had some other health conditions that we may not be able to see immediately that could potentially pose a problem to yourself and your unborn baby. So we want to make sure that we've reviewed your chart and really ask you an extensive health history questions and gotten documentation for whatever conditions you may have. Whether it's even a thyroid condition, we want to make sure those thyroid levels are normal because that can affect your newborn. So things like that.
So, um, this is kind of off the things that we said we were going to talk about, but you were a midwife in birth centers during COVID. And I know that the number of people seeking birth center care during COVID, whew, skyrocketed. And I bet we learned a lot about getting people in quickly. I wonder if there was any experiences that you had during COVID, and that you wanted to share with us.
I mean, exactly what we kind of mentioned is that people with that were not the right candidates, whether they were families calling for the repeat cesarean. We do not schedule cesareans at birth centers. That's just something we just don't do because we don't offer surgical birth. Or families that may have known they had pre-existing conditions, or people inquiring about when they would receive their epidural at our facility. So those are types of things. But when you need to get people in quickly, the easiest thing for families that want to transfer care to a birth center would be to have their records available for them. And you, as a client, should have access to your records daily. If you don't, then you want to talk to your provider or the staff about how do you get access? What do you need to do? And then once you have those records, to speak with that particular facility, let them review them and see if you are a candidate for that facility. Or sometimes, if you're open to it, talk to your OB provider. Is there a medical reason why you see it that I would not be a candidate for a birth center birth? And they'll be like, oh, these four things, or this is happening. And then you can be able to make an informed decision about, is this the right thing? Don't get me wrong. You can go to an open house and speak with them and they'll still tell you the same thing, probably. But if they weren't correct, they can be able to tell you why you may be a candidate. And this is why we tell families to really start to think about this when we're having our first baby, so that this way we can avoid maybe unnecessary interventions that may lead to a surgical birth, unless that's what you're choosing. Some families are choosing to have surgery because that's what they're choosing, and we need to respect that. But if you don't want to have surgical birth, how can we limit the amount of surgeries to your uterus? And how can we be able to educate you about what your body's doing to allow your body to labor and deliver naturally, to allow you to have the vaginal birth that you want with limited interventions?
Thank you. I, I think that not enough people know about the value of birth center birth and promotion of this model, and midwifery led birth centers is critical. I mean, it's why we're talking today, right? But I know that there are other barriers besides awareness that are preventing families from accessing birth center birth and midwifery care in that setting. I wonder if you can speak a bit about what are some of the other barriers that exist.
Some of them are insurance, and that is also sometimes a myth as well, because some people don't believe their insurance will cover it. And the only way for you to really know is to check in with the birth center or check in with your insurance carrier to see if they would cover it. Oftentimes, we do have birth centers that are federally qualified, in which people who may have limited resources can be able to access them. It just depends on your area and where you're at. The other thing to kind of keep in mind with access to birth centers is that we don't have enough to meet all the needs for birthing people. So if you happen to be in one of those states or areas where there's not a birth center, how can you work with your community to create one? Who in your community aligns with this model of care to be able to have that access? Maybe if you're pregnant now, this may not be for your current birth, but maybe for your future birth or your community's future births. How can we get more birth centers? We don't have enough to meet all the needs, so we need to definitely have access to more.
So critical, especially now, because we know that we have increasing maternity care deserts, right? So for our listeners, that means that people have to drive really far to be able to find a care provider who can care for them during pregnancy. And midwives and birth centers are definitely a solution to that. But also, every community deserves a midwife and a birth center. I would love nothing more than for every community to just know who their midwife is, to be walking in the supermarket and go, oh, there's the midwife, right? Like some communities would need a lot of them. But we have a great need in our country to grow more midwives and to grow more birth centers. So I hope someone listening is thinking about the advocacy that they can do in their community to help to build a birth center. Reach out to either of us. We can put you in touch with some folks that can give you some experience in that work.
And one thing that you also reminded me of is that we do also need more midwives. We don't have enough midwives in our country to meet the needs of all our birthing people. And how do we access more education through nursing or through other pathways to be able to allow more people to be midwives? And we definitely need that more. And one project that we're currently working on is a more national stance, which is Beloved Birth 50 by 50, where we're trying to allow midwives, more birthing people, more access to midwives, so that by the year 2050, at least 50% of the birthing people would have access to midwifery-led care. And whatever that means, does that mean just one prenatal visit? Does that mean in the postpartum? Does that mean in labor? Does that mean in the triage when you come to a regular hospital? What does that mean? How do we get access to midwifery care? Because we find that folks that have a conversation with a midwife at some point in their pregnancy feel more informed and feel more prepared for that process. So how do we kind of get to there? So we're asking, for folks to figure out what systems need to change, what political systems, what types of funding, education, reimbursement, access to birth center care, access to midwives at hospitals. We need all of this to happen to make sure that we can sort of fulfill the needs of birthing people.
Since we're talking about midwives, what's one myth about midwives that you'd love to bust?
Well, the one that I find the most comical is that I'm going to breastfeed their babies. I don't know why people think this, but
I think you're going to be a wet nurse.
I know that they confuse us for wet nurses. We do support birthing people with lactation support, and we do help you to be able to nurse, but we don't breastfeed your baby. So yeah. And that we're different than our doula, because we do have clinical training that just not only lasts in understanding birth, but also GYN care, regular primary care. So every midwife has few more tools in their box than you may be aware of.
Love it. Oh my gosh. That's a funny one. I've never heard that one before. Thank you so much for joining us on Discover Midwives. And it's really been a pleasure. And I hope that our listeners have learned something. I know I certainly have. As we wrap up today, I want to leave our listeners with this. You deserve care that listens to you, respects you, and includes you in every decision about your body. If something in today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to write it down, talk about it with someone you trust, and bring it with you to your next healthcare visit. Information is powerful, but using it is where change begins. If you found this episode helpful, you can follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Sharing this episode helps more people learn about their options and what respectful maternity care can look like. Thank you for spending this time with us. Take good care, and I'll meet you back here next time. Discover Midwives was brought to you by the American College of Nurse Midwives. To find a midwife in your community, go to midwife midwifery.org.